My name is Vivian Tran, 32 years old. Before 2 p.m. today, I was a senior project director at Apex Structure and Design, one of the largest architecture and infrastructure corporations in the western United States. And as I stood in the splendid wedding hall of the Fairmont San Francisco Hotel, my wedding dress still perfectly creased, the wedding flowers still dewy, I received a message. You're fired. Consider it my wedding gift to you. Brandon Ellis, the newly appointed CEO, and also the son of the corporation's owner. I read the message 3 times. Each time, the words seemed to stab deeper into my brain, as if he wanted to make sure I couldn't misunderstand the content. It was too clear. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just stood there, amidst the crystal chandeliers and the jazz music echoing from the banquet hall, and felt my heart grow cold. Minutes before, I had just said I do to Daniel Carter, the man I loved, who always saw through me even when I hid the most. I handed him my phone. He read the message, raising an eyebrow slightly, as if it were just a silly joke, then looked at me and smiled. Don't worry, today belongs to us. Check your messages later. I didn't understand why he wasn't angry. Even I was trembling. I had just lost the position I had spent over 6 years climbing with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But Daniel just took my hand, kissing my knuckles gently as if nothing had happened, because he was Daniel Carter, the eldest son of Senator Robert Carter, one of the most influential people in Washington, his power extending from the legislature, media, to even federal construction committees. He didn't say anything else, and I didn't ask. I handed my phone back to Celine, my best friend and bridesmaid, then walked with Daniel through the main door of the banquet hall, where hundreds of rose petals were falling like snow amidst the applause. We celebrated, danced, and I forced myself to forget everything but him. 3 hours later, as Etta James's At Last played, and we were dancing for the first time as husband and wife, Celine rushed to my side, her face pale. Vivian, you need to check your phone right away. You have 99 missed calls. From the office, from legal, from clients, and 14 calls from Brandon's father, Mr. Ellis. I felt my heartbeat constrict as if hearing an alarm in a tunnel. I snatched the phone from her hand. The screen was almost red hot. Messages piled up. Missed calls continuously from various numbers from the project management office, the architect team, even the internal communications department. But there was one name that sent chills down my spine. Gregory Ellis, the founder of Apex, who once called me the company's most valuable asset. I left the dance floor and hurried to the bridal suite. The music behind me seemed to fade as I locked the door, my hands trembling as I dialed into voicemail. Vivian, this is Gregory. Call me back immediately. Brandon has no authority to fire you. This is a serious mistake. We need you. His voice was deep, urgent. I listened further. The downtown project system you built. No one can access it. The password Brandon tried doesn't work. The legal department is panicking. West End Development is threatening to sue because they can't find the final drawings. We're in crisis. I sank into the velvet armchair in the room. My wedding dress spilled onto the floor like a white wave. And right there, I realized something. I had lost nothing. I was the entire system. I was the only one who could unlock everything. Brandon had cut off the lifeline of a multi-hundred-million-dollar project just to gloat in a wedding gift message. The door to the room opened softly. Daniel walked in, without knocking. He sat down next to me, careful not to wrinkle my dress. You need to know this. Brandon sent new drawings to the city's appraisal department, but I checked, and he modified the structural part after the engineers signed off changing materials, removing bracing. Things that could cause collapse if built. I looked at him, stunned. That's fraud, and deadly dangerous. Daniel nodded. I've started recording everything. I plan to report it next week. But now, I didn't let him finish. I understood. Brandon didn't just envy me. He was also trying to clear the way for a large-scale fraud, and what I built was the biggest obstacle. I looked at him. What do we do? Daniel just smiled lightly, like before. Not today. Today, we dance the last dance. Tomorrow, we'll start from the ashes they burned themselves. The next morning, I woke up in a small villa in Carmel Valley, where Daniel had already prepared for our honeymoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The sound of waves was quiet in the distance. And my phone continued to vibrate in bursts. 120 missed calls. 47 messages. Gregory Ellis called. The legal department called. Even the executive vice president, who had never directly contacted me, left a nearly 2-minute voicemail, urgent and strained. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't need to rush. I was the only one who knew how the system worked. I knew how to access all digital drawings, approval chains, budget plans, material distribution. And Brandon? He thought removing me from the system was enough. But that system was me. Daniel brought coffee to the balcony. Without saying anything, he just handed me the cappuccino. I looked at him. You know what's going on, don't you? He nodded. Ellis is about to lose everything. West End Development is pulling out. The city is freezing the downtown project. I leaned back in the chair. Every cell in my body felt stretched with adrenaline. I was stabbed in the back, but that very stab made me stand taller than ever. Daniel placed his hand on my thigh, his voice low. Viv, my father knows. If you want, he can intervene from the Senate. But I think you don't need him. I laughed, small, cold. Number, I won't need anyone to clean up this mess for me. I'll use it to pave my own way. We stayed in Carmel for 4 more days. I cut off all communication. Not a single email, not a single call was answered. And during that time, I redesigned my future. On the 5th day, while drinking coconut water by the lake, I received a single message that made me stop and read. Vivian, we accept any conditions. Triple your salary. Just come back. Gregory Ellis. I deleted the message. No response. 3 hours later, another message. We are ready to offer you a minority stake. CEO status. You are the only one who can save this project. This time, Daniel looked at me and asked, Still not enough? I shook my head. They still think the problem is money, but what I need is the power to set the rules. 2 days later, I sat by the lake, iPad in hand, and officially filed for my company, Veritas Construct Advisory, an independent consulting firm for construction inspection systems and engineering ethics validation. First client, the San Francisco Department of Building Inspection. Referrer. My husband, Daniel Carter. 12 minutes after the business registration information went live, my phone rang. This time I answered. Vivian, thank God you answered. I don't need you as an employee. I'm hiring you your company at any cost. Gregory's voice trembled. He understood. I smiled, gently as one who had just poured hot tea into a porcelain cup. You're too late, Gregory. I'm working with the city on establishing new verification procedures. Silence on the other end. A heavy sigh. Vivian, please. Brandon made a mistake. But don't let this company die because of it. You're the only one who understands the system. Save it. I looked out at the lake, slowly replying. I'll think about signing a contract. But I'm a partner, not a subordinate. All technical decisions and approvals will go through me. I'm not coming back to be lectured again. We accept. I'll work with the board. One more thing, I said, my voice low. I want Brandon removed from all management positions. Every document he ever touched will be reviewed by my system. No exceptions. This time, Gregory didn't resist. I understand. I hung up, not because I forgave, but because I chose to rebuild on my terms, not theirs. 3 days after the last call with Gregory, I walked into the San Francisco Department of Building Permits and Inspections, building this time not to submit drawings. I came as the one who would rewrite the inspection system that the entire city would have to follow. My temporary name tag clearly read, Vivian Tran, CEO, Veritas Construct Advisory. It didn't take long for the city to see the loopholes in how companies like Apex manipulated the process. Drawings modified after approval, substitute materials unchecked, construction supervision merely formal. I didn't need to expose anyone. I just needed to present the system I once built and how it was disabled when I was removed. The Engineering Council sat silently in the first meeting, listening to me present the 42 inspection points that Brandon Ellis had omitted in the downtown project submissions. When I showed the last slide, a photo of the hidden structural changes in the foundation, an old engineer slammed his hand on the table. My God, if built according to this, one heavy rain is enough to collapse the entire basement. I said nothing. My silence was the strongest accusation. The next day, the city officially announced all contracts with Apex Structure and Design were temporarily suspended, an internal investigation was opened, and Veritas was authorized to audit the entire data supply chain from the past 6 months. Gregory Ellis called me that evening, his voice no longer calm as usual. "Vivian, the board agrees to all your conditions. 3-year contract, 6 months paid in advance, and Brandon is suspended." I replied without emotion. "I will send detailed terms tomorrow morning. And Gregory, from now on, all communication between us will be through legal." He understood. I was no longer an employee they could soothe with sweet words. I was an independent partner, and every time I walked into a meeting, they had to be prepared to be inspected, not to be persuaded. 2 weeks later, the city officially removed Apex from the downtown project. This $340 million project now belonged to no one, and I was the only one with the management system, all the structural data. And now one more thing, an irreplaceable reputation. Gregory was not foolish. He understood that without me, Apex would disappear from the industry map. And so, I made my conditions. I didn't want a seat on the executive board. I wanted an entirely new collaboration structure. Apex would be responsible for design and construction. Veritas, my company, would oversee all management, compliance, and legal inspections. Every project would require 2 final signatures, one from them, one from me. "This isn't a collaborative structure," Gregory objected in our face-to-face meeting. "This is a division of power." I looked him straight in the eye. "Exactly. Because if you controlled yourselves, I wouldn't have been fired on my wedding day, would I?" After 17 minutes of discussion, Gregory nodded and signed the contract. When I stood up, his hand was still trembling. On the day the new partnership was announced, I walked into the press conference room in a simple black suit, my hair in a high bun, no jewelry except my delicate wedding ring. Daniel stood behind me, saying nothing. He didn't need to be present as a warning. Everyone there knew he was Senator Carter's son. A reporter asked, "Do you think returning to collaborate with Apex is a sign of weakness?" I just smiled. "I'm not returning. I'm establishing an unprecedented form of collaboration. I don't work for Apex. I ensure they don't make mistakes anymore." The atmosphere in the room was icy. A week later, I received a hand-delivered envelope at my office, no return address. Inside was a small silver USB, along with a short handwritten note. "The system you built, along with all the data, it belongs to you. I am no longer qualified to keep it. Brandon Ellis." I didn't need to open the USB to know what it was. Everything I had ever created, once hidden by him, was now returned by him, no longer arrogant, no longer defiant. I placed the USB in my secure safe, locking it. Not because I was afraid of it being stolen, but because I knew some things, like honor and knowledge, don't need to be opened to prove their worth. 3 months after the official partnership began, I walked onto the downtown project construction site at 6:45 a.m. The sky was still misty. The cranes stood motionless awaiting the first shift, and engineers streamed in like a metallic current in their reflective vests. I didn't plan to arrive that early, but a message made me change my schedule. "I will recheck the basement floor concrete pouring records. I want to understand every step thoroughly, to avoid mistakes. Brandon Ellis." I thought I read it wrong. Part of me thought he was putting on a show. Another part was curious. So I came. And he was there, standing in the middle of the construction site, clipboard in hand, checking each item unhurriedly. No designer shirts, no Swiss watch. Just an intern engineer in the guise of a former CEO. I walked closer. "You don't need to check directly. The field engineers do that." Brandon turned, his gaze fixed on me, unblinking. "I know. But I need to understand every detail from the beginning. If I want to rebuild, I have to learn from the ground up." I stood facing him. This was the first time we had spoken since the wedding gift message. "Why that day? Why choose the exact day of my wedding to fire me?" Brandon swallowed hard. He didn't shy away. "Because I knew you were right. About the system. About training. About my inadequacy. And I hated that. I hated that everyone in the company respected you, and I didn't. On your wedding day. I thought that was the last way to win." "And what did you win?" I asked coldly. "Nothing," he replied immediately. "I lost my father's trust, my employees, my own, and I almost killed the company. No excuses, no blame, only an admission of wrongdoing. For the first time, I looked at him more closely. This was not the Brandon Ellis of old. No more arrogance, no more empty confidence. Just a man learning to rebuild from the ruins he himself caused. You don't need to apologize to me. You don't need to curry favor with me, I said, my voice softer than before. I'm not trying to, he replied, looking straight at me. I don't want to be forgiven. I want to be proven. I nodded. Good. Start by completing all 12 Veritas training modules. From risk management, permitting procedures, to professional ethics. I'm already studying, he said. Every night. And I test myself with the very system you created. I left without saying anything more. Not because I softened, but because I understood. Not everyone deserves a chance to correct their mistakes, but those who truly change deserve a fair test. 1 month later, I sat in the Veritas office, receiving internal evaluation reports from my team. Brandon had completed 8/12 modules. Result: perfect. Answers detailed. Logical. No sign of assistance. I received another call from Apex's HR director. Gregory wants to promote Brandon back to assistant project manager. He wants your consent first. I frowned. Did he ask me? Number. He just doesn't want to do anything if you object. I leaned back in my chair, thinking for a moment. I agree, but with a condition. Brandon will have to stand before the downtown community, present the entire project again, what was modified, what is being remodified, and the new commitment. You mean? Make him publicly admit his mistakes to the public? Number. I'm letting him prove that he understands what transparency means. The community meeting took place at the Mission Community Center, a modest red brick building in the old neighborhood. Spring had just begun, the air still chilly as I entered the hall. Chairs were arranged in rows. More than 120 residents were present, mostly workers, low-income families, people whose lives the downtown project would directly affect. I sat in the back, unannounced, not appearing in any official capacity. I was just there to listen. Brandon Ellis walked onto the stage at exactly 7 p.m., wearing a dark blue shirt, no tie. He brought drawings, information boards, and a face no longer arrogant as before, only focus. Hello. I am Brandon Ellis, currently serving as assistant project manager at Apex Structure and Design. No applause. A few cold stares. A year ago, I contributed to this downtown redevelopment project, falling into crisis. Improper changes, opaque decisions, all partly my responsibility. An elderly man stood up, his voice curt. Do you know those changes cost my son his job? 6 months without pay because the construction site was shut down. Brandon didn't dodge. I know. And I don't expect forgiveness. I'm here to present what has been rectified, because you, the people who live here, have the right to know every detail. He opened a slide. Original structure versus AT. Revised version approved by Veritas Construct Advisory. Reinforcing steel has been increased. Heat-resistant roof instead of Grade 3 material. Drainage system redesigned according to the latest state standards. Every item goes through 3 levels of independent approval, with no priority for anyone. A middle-aged woman raised her hand. And if there's another mistake, who's responsible? Brandon answered without hesitation. I am. Personally, all drawings I sign will be made public for community review. And, if there's a mistake, I resign. The room suddenly fell silent. Not because the statement was so impressive, but because it was so real. It didn't have the color of public relations language. It was a person putting himself under the knife of justice and knowing it. He continued presenting for nearly 40 minutes, not once avoiding a question, many times admitting he didn't know, and promising to respond in writing within 24 hours. When the meeting ended, I stood up and left from the back row. A few residents came to shake Brandon's hand. Not enthusiastically, but with nods, pats on the shoulder, and looks that said, I'll be watching you. And for me, that was enough. The next morning, I received a call from Gregory. I heard Brandon did well at the meeting. What do you think? I replied after a few seconds of silence. I think he passed the first test. Will you support the promotion? If he completes all training, If my engineers confirm, he handles field documents according to standards for 3 consecutive months. And if he maintains his humility after that, then yes. Gregory sighed in relief. I knew you were fair. I smiled, emotionless. I'm not fair. I'm just very clear. 6 months after the community meeting, I sat in the 21st floor office of Veritas, looking down at the downtown construction site, once the starting point of the biggest betrayal of my life, and also the place that completely changed my career trajectory. The project is now more than 70% complete. No more delays, no more lawsuits, stable structure, transparent costs, and most importantly, trust has been rebuilt. Brandon Ellis has completed all 12 training modules designed by Veritas, with almost perfect internal evaluation scores. He not only passed the knowledge test, but also began retraining young employees, organizing short sharing sessions at the construction site, where he talked about why transparency is vital in the construction industry. The one who once destroyed the system is now helping it survive. That day, Rena, my assistant, walked into the room with a signing form. Apex Board officially recommends promoting Brandon to project manager. They need confirmation from Veritas. I put my pen down. Did they say why they need my confirmation? They said, because this system is yours. Everyone who plays in it must be approved by you. I looked out the window. Didn't speak immediately. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was recognition that I, the one who was silently fired, was now the final voice. I signed. That evening, I left the office late. As I was walking to the elevator, I saw Brandon waiting in the reception area. Do you have a few minutes? I nodded, leading him into a small meeting room. No staff, no eavesdroppers, no recording devices. He started. I heard you signed the confirmation. Thank you for trusting me. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. I don't trust you. I trust the system I created. And if you go wrong, that system will be the first to alert. Brandon nodded. No objection. Not at all. So, after all, can you forgive me? I looked at him for a long time. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I still clearly remember the feeling of receiving that message, right after my wedding. I still remember how you excluded me from the project just to protect your personal ego, and I still remember how I survived. He bowed his head. Said nothing. But forgiveness, Brandon, is me accepting that people can change. It's me letting the past exist, but not letting it decide the future. And today, I let you move forward. But you have to earn every step of that. Brandon stood up. He didn't offer his hand to shake. He just bowed his head slightly, not like an employee, but like a person who knew he had made mistakes and was trying to live right. 1 year after Veritas was founded, I was invited to speak at the National Planning and Inspection Conference. They asked me to share about responding to industry crises. I didn't tell the story of the firing, nor did I mention Brandon or Gregory. I just said one thing. You cannot change the past, but you can create a system that prevents the past from repeating. And sometimes, power doesn't come from controlling others, but from controlling yourself. The audience stood up and applauded. That evening, Daniel and I walked around the park near the downtown construction site. The buildings were lit up. The buildings, now social housing, health centers, green spaces, reflected light onto the night sky. Daniel held my hand. If you had a chance to go back to the moment you received that firing message, would you do anything differently? I was silent for a moment, then smiled softly. Number? Because that very fall taught me that revenge doesn't necessarily mean destruction. Sometimes, the best revenge is to rebuild and set new rules that no one can ever exclude me from again.